This is an oral history interview conducted for the Witness to War Serving a Nation project at Nauset Regional High School on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. For the sake of this interview, please state your full name and community in which you now reside.
My full name is Paul Carr Flannery, and I live in Wrentham, Massachusetts.
Okay, where and when were you born?
I was born January 13th in year 1967 in a city called Lowell, Mass.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Wrentham. We moved from Lowell when I was 2 years old.
Did you play any sports?
I did. I played baseball and basketball, and I played all the way through. I played 4 years of college basketball as well.
Where did you go to college?
I went initially at a college called Dean College in Franklin, Massachusetts, and then I went to Worcester State College in Worcester, Mass.
At what age did you become interested in joining the military?
I was pretty much always interested, but the opportunity I started to realize as I got a little older that it was time to do it. Primarily before I had children or got married or anything like that, because it can be difficult if you're married and have children. It's hard to be in the Army at the same time. It can be challenging, especially if you're married. Your wife, a military wife, is not an easy thing to be. Spend a lot of time alone, worried, things like that on deployments. So I decided. I was 28 years old, so I was pretty old. I might even have been, no, I was 27 and change, I think, when I joined. But I was done with college, had begun my career and whatnot, but it was something that I said it was kind of now or never, so I took the opportunity.
Is or was anyone in your family part of the military?
Yeah, my father served in the Korean War, or the Korean conflict. Well, they're calling it a war now, but yeah.
What did he do there?
He was a journalist and a speechwriter, actually, for his commander was a general, and he wrote speeches for him, and he actually wound up following that career path. He was the chief secretary to the governor of Massachusetts in 1972, a guy named Frank Sargent. And he also wrote speeches for George Bush. He was activated by George Bush Sr., George Herbert Walker. He worked for him in 1987 as his Massachusetts media consultant. I actually spoke to him on the phone once. I was like 14 years old, I think, or something like that. But my father died when he was 53, so that was like probably 1988 that he died, so unrelated.
Why did you want to join the military?
Challenge, primarily, and to defend the country and kind of, be a part of that. That saying, if not you, who, always kind of appealed to me. That and the student loan money. Financially, things were a little tight at that point.
At what age did you join the military?
I was 27. So I was among the oldest at basic training. Most of the guys are 18, 19, 20. 27, I was grandpa. But
what years did you serve?
I enlisted in November of 1996 and was discharged honorably in 2006. When you discharge, unless it's for reasons other than honorable, if you finish your enlistment and you have a normal discharge, it'll always be on your birthday of that year, that calendar year. They just keep you on until, not certain why, but if you get dishonorably discharged for whatever reason, they're chucking you, so they're not waiting for anything.
So were you discharged on your birthday?
I was, yeah.
Where did you serve and what did you do there?
I had a lot of different missions in my career. It's funny because when I first joined, I thought it was going to be pretty laid back and have like 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year, because I was initially a reservist. But that all changed after September 11th. Our whole posture as a military changed, as most people remember. Could you repeat that question?
Yeah. Where did you serve and what did you do there?
I served on several missions. They were counter-drug, counter-alien missions in Mexico along the border. That was in 1996, 97, and 98. I was part of what was called Joint Task Force 5, 6, and 7. That was when George Bush declared the war on drugs years back. And he committed the military to the border to stop the flow of drugs into the United States. So I did 3 missions down there. There were probably 15 missions I did, but I'll hit the big ones. The Mexican missions were, they were important, but it wasn't wartime. Just by dumb luck, I wound up in Egypt. I was in Cairo and Alexandria, and then the Mubarak military city. Hosni Mubarak was the president of Egypt at the time. I think he just gave it up, like in the Arab Spring, the uprisings there. But I was there it was a counterterrorism mission that the United States is a part of every year. It's called Operation Bright Star. And there's the host nation, which changes every year. That particular year it was Egypt, and it was the United States, Britain, Australia, Egypt was the host, and South Korea. And just by dumb luck, September 11th happened. I got there to Cairo in second week in August, and September 11th happened, a month later, something like that, 3 weeks, and then everything changed. The mission was canceled, but we were stuck over there because there were no flights into the United States, especially from Arabic countries, and it was just a really weird period. I mean, I don't know if you lived through that. You are pretty young, so I don't know if you were you were alive, right? So in 2001?
No, 2004.
Okay. There was a pretty tumultuous period when those attacks took place, and we were uncertain where we were going. We thought we were going to wind up in Yemen. Half of my unit got pulled directly to Afghanistan from Egypt. About a handful of us were fortunate enough that we got back home. I mean, not for long. We wound up getting deployed for the Iraq conflict or the Operation Iraqi Freedom, but for that period it was, I felt pretty lucky to get out of there.
What branch of the military did you serve?
U.S. Army, in the Corps of Engineers.
What was your favorite part of being in the military?
The camaraderie, the guys that you end up serving with. You're put in situations where you're required to trust one another on a level that you typically reserve for family only. But, you love these guys because a lot of times it can be life or death scenarios. And you spend a lot of time with them, a long way from home, and, they become like family. I think that's probably the most important part. That and the pride of serving the country, and the action. It's pretty high adventure sometimes. And you get to travel. It's pretty cool. I've been everywhere.
Were you forced into a scenario where you had to inflict harm on another person?
Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah. Firefights. We had a sniper firing on us. We were in Abu Ghraib prison, which if you check your history, if you go looking after that, there was quite a scandal there. But when we were working there, we were pretty much getting mortared every afternoon, just about dusk. They were firing from across the highway from the prison. Abu Ghraib, I think in Arabic, Abu Ghraib means the father, and that was the central detention facility for all of Iraq. So you had a lot of prisoners in there. When the war began, Hussein made a promise that he would do two things. He would light all the oil wells on fire, and he would release all the prisoners, open the prison doors, so that we'd have, a lot more to deal with. It was a threat, but he carried out. He didn't light the oil wells on fire this time around, but he did in the first Gulf War in the early 90s, and it was an ecological disaster. It wound up, doing more harm to his country than good. But basically what he was trying to do there is pursue like a scorched earth policy. He said, if you want to come take my country, I'm going to screw it up so bad that you won't want it. But he did release the prisoners. So when we pulled up on Abu Ghraib, they were all hanging out outside, sitting around 50-gallon drums, warming their hands with fires in them, asking us for water and food, because he had jailed some of these guys for 30 years, like political prisoners and whatnot. They don't have a life outside of that prison. They just wanted to go back inside. And it became, the scandal kind of erupted around we were using advanced interrogation techniques at that prison, waterboarding, but the intelligence that we gleaned from them saved a lot of lives. We learned what what Al Qaeda was doing, where the attacks were going to take place, things like that. But pursuant to the Geneva Conference, you're really not supposed to do those kind of things. And the Geneva Conference sets like a safety net of rules for a war. For example, if you take a POW, prisoner of war, you have to provide them, all they have to provide you is name, rank, and serial number, but that's actually your social security number. And you have to feed them, have them detained in what they call humane environments. And the funniest thing, and it's so important, but I didn't realize how important it was until I was actually away from my family for an extended period, you have to provide them with postal service. Every week you have to provide them with envelopes, stamps, and the capacity to deliver them to the address that they're sending to. So it's interesting. It kind of tries to bring some humanity and caring to an otherwise terrible enterprise. War is a nasty thing, and they try to kind of soften it and make it more humane. But I always got a kick out of the postal service. It was, but then again, these guys, if you're a POW, yeah, you want to let your family know that you're safe and whatnot, and find out what's going on, because it's not easy being jailed as a POW. I can't imagine. I didn't ever, thank God. But when you see those license plates that have a POW on them, like a mass license plate that says POW, you can bet your tail that was a rough ride for that guy. But the only other Geneva Conference or convention that was actually done right after World War I believe, because World War I was a particularly brutal war, and they wanted to kind of, knowing that it's war and all's fair in love and war, as they say, they wanted to have some rules, at least a safety net or a basic set of humanity rules to, not every country abides by them. Japan didn't. These guys that, like the Mujahideen in Iraq, which Mujahideen is basically a holy warrior, those guys they don't represent any specific country. They hijacked the Muslim faith so that they would have a wide appeal in their country. Then they're not Muslims. They don't behave like them. But my point is that because they're not associated with a specific country, that country didn't agree to the Geneva Convention rules. So that's why you see them cutting people's heads off with, sabers and swords and things. because they don't care. They have no regard for human life, and they don't have to because they didn't agree to the Geneva Convention, so they can't be taken and held in a war tribunal and, you know, for crimes against humanity. They didn't agree to anything in the first place, so it's what makes them kind of hard to fight too, because you don't know, can't really punish the country because they don't belong to any specific country, like ISIS right now or Al Qaeda. The country of origin for most of those mujahideen or the holy warriors that make up those terrorist organizations, they're from everywhere from Yemen to Saudi Arabia to Iraq, Afghanistan, wherever. So you can't really go after any specific country to punish them. It's tough. The other one that I remember from the Geneva Convention, because you're briefed on it as a soldier, in case you're in a position where you have to hold prisoners. So you remember what the requirements are, your bare minimums. One of them was the right to worship. Every week you had to give them at least 1 hour, whatever their religion was. If they were Wiccan or if they, you know, worshipped a head of lettuce, you had to provide the head of lettuce. You know what I mean? It's a joke, but it's pretty comprehensive, the requirements.
What was the scariest thing that happened to you?
I'd have to say it was our initial entry into the country. We were only the second flight. They call them tail numbers in the Army, but our tail number was the second aircraft. It was a C-5 Galaxy. It's the biggest aircraft next to the Russians have one that's slightly larger, but this thing can hold 450 troops, 2 full missile batteries, which are huge. They're like the size of the house, and 2 tanks that are 60 tons apiece. And this thing can fly something like 21 hours. It has enough fuel, because that's the biggest concern. You have so much fuel in there to keep your range so you can fly great distances. But that aircraft holds a lot of people and a lot of equipment. And I went in on one of those. The seats all face backwards. Like, you know, when you're on a regular commercial flight, you're looking at the front of the plane, like where the cabin is, where the pilots are. Mm-hmm. Not so in a combat aircraft. And I learned why pretty quickly, because when we went into Baghdad International Airport, it was, late March of 2003. The war was like probably a month old. So that airport was still under siege. There were still, you know, active groups firing on aircraft that were trying to land at the airport. So they just canceled all of them and said, you know, don't fly. Go to Kuwait and drive up. But we couldn't do that for reasons that are classified, unfortunately. I can't tell you. But we had to go in. You come in at like 25, 30,000 feet, and you do what's called a spiral or a combat landing. If you came in on an average landing, your altitude would decrease over like a 5-mile stretch of land, and it would give them opportunity to shoot you out of the sky with RPGs, surface-to-air missiles, whatever they had. So to avoid that, you go in steep and go straight down. That's why the seats face the opposite way. So you're not falling forward, you just kind of get sucked into your chair. And that was about the scariest, because all the lights go out in the aircraft. We could hear the aircraft getting hit by a small weapon fire. We didn't get hit by anything big, else I wouldn't be here. But it was freaky. It was about 3:30 in the morning when they dropped the back gate and we all came off. All you could smell was everything seemed to be burning. You could see small fires all over the place. You could hear small weapons fire. I can remember one of my buddies said, "What did we get ourselves into?" So it was, it was a pretty interesting scenario all around. But go ahead. Next one.
What regrets did you have?
Regrets. I wish I didn't get injured, because some of the injuries that I have to deal with are really a pain in the ass. Just use my language. Pain in my tail. That's what I meant to say. painted my donkey, same thing. Anyway, yeah, regrets, injuries, but other than that, not many. I mean, I did what I was told. I showed some restraint and mercy in scenarios where I didn't have to do that, where, you know, it was a difference between a guy dying and a guy not dying. But I made the right choice, and I don't have to live with that. So.
What injuries did you sustain during the war?
I had a traumatic brain injury from a mortar round. I'm not even certain which one it was because there were like 3 of them that were close enough so that I was struck by rocks from the. It's a 123 mortar round. They're pretty big. Like if one hit this house, it would clear it. But I had one on 3 different occasions. Once in Abu Ghraib prison, once on a tarmac in Baghdad, and then once right outside where we were sleeping. I was hanging my laundry. I was in like a pair of shorts and t-shirt. It was like a Sunday. Had the day off, and they snuck one in, and a mortar round hit. I was close enough so that it sprayed me with rocks. The shock waves and the concussion from that level of explosive, when it passes through your head, does damage, and I did get some damage. I didn't realize it till I was home for probably 7 years, and I saw a study being done at the VA in Boston, and I was looking at the symptoms, and I was like, oh no. And sure enough, they did an MRI, and I had just some damage to my hippocampus and to the Solaris something or other in my brain. But that, I do suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Unfortunately, the timing of the blast injury and the scenario that I was in, I have a condition that they don't really have a name for, but they test my blood every 6 months. And there's you ever hear of fight or flight? It's a choice that you make when you're in a really like a survival type situation. There's a hormone called cortisol that is released in your brain that increases your capacities as pretty much athletic, because you're preparing to either fight or die, or run, and the choice is death. So your body basically goes into a mode where it says, you know, regardless of how much damage this cortisol is going to do, or how, you know, it basically makes you 40% more efficient as someone who's trying to survive. So when I got hit with one of those blasts, there was cortisol release that was already taking place. It damaged the area that the cortisol is released, so I have like a much higher level of cortisol. So I have a hard time sleeping. I have a hard time gaining weight because I'm just running really fast all the time, and it's difficult. But that was one. The PTSD combat level, that's diagnosed. TBI, which is traumatic brain injury or blast injury. In one of the blasts, I had my meniscus and my ACL, my meniscus in my right knee and my ACL on my left. I could show you, there's a big lump because we didn't have hospitals at that point, so they couldn't do surgery. So they kind of just let it heal, and it healed screwed up. But it's okay. It doesn't hurt or anything, you know, so I could have it removed, but my doctor says, why bother? You're just opening yourself up to infection because it's relatively deep. So, what else? Oh, I handled, we were in charge of a munitions dump with a unit that's called UXO, which stands for unexploded ordnance. Because in a war, a lot of the stuff that falls out of the plane, like I think it's like 17%, don't detonate. So they just fall to the ground and they sit there. So you got an unexploded bomb sitting on the ground. So these poor guys from the UXO unit have to go and collect all that stuff, bring it to a safe place, and detonate it, because you can't just leave it. Kids will come up and toy with it and blow themselves to bits. But I wound up handling a handful of them, and I got exposed to, one of them had VX gas resin on them, and I got, this is 15 years old, and it affected my autoimmune system, and I get these kind of weird, like, dry patches and splits on my hands sometimes. But the rest of me is in the pink.
Did you ever refuse to do something that you were ordered to do?
Yeah, but it was when you're in war, a lot of guys have a saying where they say, trust your spidey senses, Spider-Man's sense. It's like your sixth sense. And we've been driving when you go in a convoy, before the convoy sets out, we had to drive to Abu Ghraib prison from Baghdad every day for like 2 months. And it was I think they called it the Triangle of Death. It was the most dangerous highway in the world for like 8 years straight. We called it Route Tampa, but that's where they did all the roadside attacks. That's where they would set up and fire on you while you were driving. So we went in armored convoys, that one particular day we had run that same route 3 days straight, and it took us right through this bazaar. A bazaar is like a marketplace, but it's out in the open, and they sell fruit and everything else. And when we were going through that bazaar, I can remember the second day, I was like, man, if they figure us out, we are just sitting ducks here. This is an awesome scenario for a roadside attack. They could kill us all. So day 3, the lazy sergeant that was running the security on the convoy took the same route again. And we complained in the briefing, like before we headed out, but he was like, no, this is how we go. We've decided this is the safest route. And as we pulled into that town on the way to Fallujah, to Abu Ghraib, I took a left because I knew I'd been seeing it for days. There was a little dirt road that went right around that village that to me was like much better. It was hardball, like asphalt road and everything, so it wasn't like there could be mines underneath it. You just had to be somewhat careful. So I had 5 guys in my truck, and I swung off, and there were 3 trucks behind me that did the same thing because they just assumed I knew where I was going. When they went through that bazaar, they got hit with a roadside bomb. 11 guys got killed. I would have been one of them if I had not disobeyed that order. But typically, no, you try not to disobey general orders. You do what you're told.
Okay. What type of weapons were you issued, and did you utilize them?
I did use them. Had to several times. M16A1, 7.625 round, about the size of your pen. Powder's in here. Rest is lead. I had a 203 grenade launcher mounted underneath the M16. That's rare. They tried to set us up so that we were showy. So if the enemy was looking at us, they'd say, oh, these guys have got some pretty heavy weapons. 203 grenade launcher it's a 40 millimeter round that goes into a break breech rifling mechanism. When it goes out after 100 revolutions, which happens probably 10 feet from the actual end of the barrel, it's armed. And whatever it hits, it's a 15-meter kill radius. So anyone within 15 meters in any direction is dead. The 203 has 4 different types of round. It has an HE, which is high explosive, illuminary, so you could fire it in the air in the dark and it like lights things up like day. High explosive, luminary, corrosive, which you can fire at a vehicle. Phosphorus, actually, it's not corrosive, it's called phosphorus. And the last is concussion. So on you wear what's called a load-bearing vest. It has what you call full battle rattle because it rattles when you walk. But if you go out in full battle rattle, it means you're carrying all of the ammo that you can. So with me, it was 6 banana clips, they're 30 round clips for my 16, so 180 bullets, and 4 203 shells, grenade. They all fit on a vest. It's something that you have packed and loaded, and if things go sideways on you, you throw that on so that you are fully armed and ready to rock for hours if you need to. So yeah, I had to use that a lot. The 16 I used quite a bit. The 203 I used. It's hard to know how many casualties I inflicted. I know of 4 opposition troops that I killed, but when you're using the 203, it's difficult to ascertain how many you killed. Like I had to fire one into a building because a sniper was firing on us, and when it went off, the sniper had been set up for days because there was a clothesline that came out one of the windows, shoes and everything else. And one of the rangers that we were attached to ended up going and doing a recon in the building and said, he said cranberry sauce, which means when you hit somebody with 203, that's pretty much all you find is teeth and cranberry sauce.
Okay.
Sorry about that. I don't mean to gross anybody out. But.
No, it's okay. At what point were you mobilized for the war you served during?
The shock and awe campaign initiated that war. That was in March of 2003. I was mobilized in February, so a month before that. But I didn't get into the theater until early May. I was finally got into Iraq. You go to a MOB site, they call it. Mine, for the East Coast, it was Fort Dix in New Jersey and McGuire Air Force Base. You go there, they make sure you're healthy, you're stable, because psychologically, you need to be 100% there. You can't be crazy. They're not going to give you a weapon and send you off if you're a fruitcake. But and you make sure that everything, like I was, like right down to really unique stuff. Like my blood type is O negative. It's pretty rare, and it's a universal donor. Like I can give to everybody, but I can only take O negative back. It's kind of a screw job, but I had to build a blood bank. Long story short, I had to, over like a 3-week period, I had to give 5 pints that they brought with me to Iraq in case I got injured. They wanted to have O negative available for me. The funny thing is that when I left, I didn't really have any blood injuries. I just had mostly, they didn't have to give me blood anywhere. I didn't bleed. But I said, can I take my 5 pints back? And they were like, those were gone in the first 2 weeks you were here. You use them on other people because it's universal. So if you get like a trauma, like a casualty or a trauma that like they don't have time to figure out what your blood type is, even though it's on your dog tag, they will just bang you with O negative because it's universal. Was that the question? I might have gone off track there. I'm sorry.
At what point were you mobilized for the war?
Yeah. So I went to the MOB site, and you do some unique things there. But from when you're mobilized to when you actually get in the theater can be a long time. It can be months. I was fortunate; it was only a couple months for me, but there were other units at Fort Dix that were there for like 6-7 months. I remember one unit; they never even got there. Their whole deployment of 18 months was spent at Fort Dix in New Jersey. That's tough. Because you're thinking, I'm going to go fight in a war, and you don't get out of Jersey. That's tough. It's kind of hard to tell your grandchildren, Daddy fought in the war, but I never left New Jersey. Anyway, I'm getting off point. Sorry.
Okay. What operations were you or your unit a part
I'm unique in that regard. During the war, and you can see on my license plate, you won't see many that have my veterans plate on the car. It'll have Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom. Just the timing that I was in, and I was mobilized for 18 months. Iraqi freedom terminated, and then they began enduring freedom. And enduring freedom was primarily in continental U.S. It was back stateside because it was protecting against terrorist attacks on like reservoirs and things. You don't remember this because you weren't born, but your professor probably will, your teacher. It was a really scary period for a couple of years there, where they were just waiting for, people were getting anthrax dust in the powder in the mail and whatnot. It was creepy. So enduring freedom, when I got home from Iraq, we just kind of pivoted and started doing stateside stuff, counterterrorism stuff.
Okay.
So enduring freedom and Iraqi freedom.
How long were you mobilized for?
18 months.
What was your area of operation in the war theater?
I was initially in Baghdad, the capital of Iraq, and then I had a mission that was 4 months long in Abu Ghraib prison, which I'll bet your professor will hit on, because it was a big conspiracy. Well, not a conspiracy. It was just a bit of a crisis happened there, because they thought we were violating the Geneva Convention, and there was a question whether or not the United States was fair or ruthless, or, it just got ugly. He'll explain it. He knows it. There's a girl named Lindsay England that wound up sending pictures from inside Abu Ghraib prison back stateside that were not very flattering for U.S. troops. Like, some of the prisoners, she had them, like, they were playing with them. They had them on dog chains and stuff, naked, and for a Muslim man, for a woman to do that to a Muslim man is, but they were trying to break them so that they'd give up the information we wanted. And it worked, but the means were a little bit disgusting to the rest of the world and to the rest of the country here in the United States, because we ended up looking like savages. What was the question? I got off point.
What was your area of operation in?
Yes, Baghdad, Abu Ghraib prison, and then during the first battle for Fallujah, I was stationed just outside of Fallujah. Fallujah means the city of temples. It's been a pivotal, that country's had a handful of wars, and Fallujah's the place they protect the most strongly, I guess is the way to put it.
Okay. How did your family react when you left?
I had a 4-year-old daughter. Well, let me see, 2003. 4. She was 4 years old when I deployed, and I don't think she grasped it completely, but I had a fiance that did, and she was none too pleased. My brothers were proud. My sister was freaking. My mother kept a stiff upper lip, but I learned after the war that she didn't sleep much. And I can remember hearing, even when I wasn't even I couldn't tell them because it's classified. Some of the missions I had over there were top secret and eyes only type missions. So I couldn't really be telling people when I was gone or where I was going or any of that stuff. It was classified. You could compromise the what they call the OPSEC, or the operational security of that mission. So couldn't tell them, had to keep them in the dark. They could probably hear in my voice certain, maybe a heightened sense of, fear or whatever. And yeah, my brothers had to ultimately not allow my mother to watch the evening news because it was just never good news. And she knew I was there. And it was just difficult. I can't imagine what it's like for a parent that watches their son or daughter go off to war. And to give you a good idea of it, when you mobilize, they brief you on what's called DOR, delivery of remains. Should you be killed in action, you need to fill out a form before the war so that they know where to send what's left of you, your body. And I'll never forget it because we all filled it right out and just put our home addresses, like our parents, And an Army psychologist came in afterwards and said, okay, how many of you guys put your parents' address? We're all like, we did, it was like 60 of us in the room. And he said, okay, throw those out because that's not how it's going to go. You can't deliver your remains to your parents. You choose a funeral home in town and get that address and do it that way, because can you imagine your son or daughter having their remains delivered to you at home? And I thought about it and we were like, shit, that's right. Sorry about the swear. I'm sure they've heard it.
Okay, tell me about your first day in country.
Oh, when we did that combat landing from 35,000 feet, that was pretty wild. Lights go out and everything. You're like, is this aircraft failing, or why are the lights out? But the reason is because they don't want the OP-4 on the ground to be able to see you and fire on you. So after that experience, basically sitting, looking straight up at the sky while the plane just nosedives on a spiral down. After the landing, which was not easy, we smashed around a little bit. When they dropped the back deck, it was just like everything was on fire and everything smelled like burning tires. That's what it smelled like, the rubber. I'll never forget that smell. I'll never forget that moment. There were like 4 or 5 guys, like we all just wound up getting really tight together. And all we were doing was getting off the plane. I don't think we were in any real danger at that point, but it was just to be introduced to that scenario was like, this isn't, you kind of had an idea what to expect, but you see movies and you think it's going to be different, like action, but it's not. Like there's some gunplay going on, but it's far enough away from you that you don't have to worry about it. But everything's wrecked and the destruction is just disturbing, and the smell. And we got in a couple of Humvees and drove to what you call our hooch, which wound up being, that's where you sleep. It was a power plant because we were high voltage linemen, so they wanted to keep us all together, the electrical engineers and the transmission guys, which was what we were. We're all staying in the same place, and we were responsible for providing power, restoring and providing power for almost all of southern Baghdad. So we slept in the power plant, and yeah, that first night, not much sleep, but quite an experience.
Did you lose any members of your unit?
We had guys go home, but it was for reasons other than grievous injury or casualty or death. We did lose one guy in Afghanistan who was a pretty good friend, but I wasn't in that theater. That half of our unit got sent there, and I wasn't with those guys in Afghanistan, but we did get wind of him being killed. There were a couple of guys that weren't in my unit that were, that I shaved next to they didn't have running water when I first got there. Like I didn't take a shower for over 3 weeks. I don't know if you remember, your professor probably will, but the care packages had wet naps in them. Like they, those things you pull out of the top. That's how we took showers for like 3 weeks, almost a month. So no running water, all bottled water, always hot because there was no way to keep them cool, and it was like 130 degrees during the day there. It got down to about like 90 at night, but it was just out of control heat. So everything you drank was hot, at least, or warm. When you shave, like, you have to shave. You know, you can't just grow a beard because, you know, you're in the Army. You have to, there are requirements. You can't grow a beard because if you have to don a gas mask, the seal won't be right because the hair in your face. And we all had mop gear, they call it, issued to us, and were drilled on, you know, donning your gas mask because he had VX gas and mustard gas there. He used it against his own people, the Kurds in the north, right after the end of the first Gulf War that we had. So weapons of mass destruction, he had them, no question. So we had to have gas masks. So you had to shave, and didn't have running water, so they would take what's called a water buffalo. It's just a huge water tanker with what they called non-potable water. You can't drink it, but you can shower with it and shave with it. It's clean enough for that, but you don't want to drink it. You'll get sick. And the way they rigged up the buffalo was they would pull in the morning, filled with water, and I mean there were 85 people sleeping in the power plant with, you know, myself, and we would go out in the morning and shave. They had mirrors set up all along the spigots, so you had running water so you could shave. And every morning I would shave with this one kid. He was just such a nice kid. His name was, his last name was Starling. I remember that. I don't remember his first name. I could, but he wound up getting killed early in the war too. It was pretty bad. One of the guys I was with when the truck got hit, it was a roadside attack. He had what's called bone shrapnel. I never heard of it before, but he was so completely, the detonation was so devastating that fragments of his bone went into one of my buddy's wrist and hand. They had to pull pieces of somebody else's bones out of it. It was crazy. But I digress. Please.
What was your rank?
I was a staff sergeant in E6. I actually was promoted. I had what was called a field promotion because we had a guy from another unit that was the staff sergeant on the commander's staff who was killed. So I took his slot. E6, staff sergeant.
The last question, did you receive any care packages and what was important about them?
Just to be reminded that somebody back home cared about you, because I didn't have a lot of communication with the period I was there. It improved significantly over the years, but I could only call home like once every couple of weeks, and so letters and care packages were huge. But some stuff didn't travel. I can remember my fiance tried to send me a block of Cracker Barrel cheese, but in that environment it was so hot, and the mail sat in what's called a Connex trailer before it got distributed, and it completely liquefied the cheese. When I got it, it was like, it was all water and separated, and sucked because I really wanted some cheese.
Is that it? Alright, thank you for your time and service.
Oh, you're welcome.